Earlier this year, CZ released their Shadow 2 Carry, which is the carry version of the Shadow 2 lineup. It shares many similarities with this model P-01 over here, but does come with a lot of external improvements such as the front and back strap checkering, the higher cut on the trigger guard and beaver tail, and the factory cut for RMSC optic. What they haven't really changed is the trigger mechanism. They might have polished it up from the P-01, but it's mostly the same. They wanted to maintain the firing pin block and the decocker for carry, the firing pin block for job safety. Which means most of the complaints about the P-01 trigger will carry over to the Shadow 2 Carry. This active lifter system aims to resolve some of those issues, mainly the long trigger reset and the somewhat gritty single action take-up. We have two components to this system. We have the firing pin block and the firing pin block lifter. We're using the OEM firing pin here, so we need quite a bit of lift in order to allow the firing pin to go through. And when we pull the trigger, you'll see how much lift we will get from the firing pin block. Quite a bit. And if I pull the slide back, you'll see that the firing pin block comes down. And if I return the battery, you'll see that it comes back up. Reason being is the lifter remains active even after a slide reset. This is similar to a Langdon Tactical Beretta bar, trigger bar, or a SIG SRT system, where those systems don't allow their firing pin block lifters to reset after a slide cycle. What that means is the reset is solely dictated by the sear to trigger bar engagement. And we get a very short reset here. Very nice. And to address the double wall, what they're feeling when they mention double wall is initially you'll feel some slight resistance of the trigger, and then you'll meet some heavier resistance, and they call that the first wall. What they're actually feeling is the firing pin block starting to engage, and then they'll meet the actual wall of the sear, and then break. With this system, at rest, the firing pin block is partially engaged, which means you're no longer going to feel that first wall of the firing pin block starting to engage. You're only going to feel one type of resistance through the single action. Makes it smoother, and break. This system is about as drop safe as a Cajun gunwork system. At rest, doesn't let the firing pin block through. I don't know if that's picking up on camera, but and if I pull a little bit, not quite to the wall, it still doesn't let the firing pin block firing pin through. And if I pull through to the wall, you can see we are letting the firing pin through. And then we can break. If we wanted more safety, more drop safety, we can remove some material from the disconnector and increase the single action take up here to maybe 3 millimeters, 4 millimeters, however, whatever makes you feel safe. For me, I think 2 millimeters is fine. Gives it a nice single action pull. It's always a compromise. Whether you want to have less take up, less safety, or more take up, more safety. All right, let's get to the trigger pull of this pistol. For double action, not a lot of take up, but a very smooth double action. The weight on that is, let's see, 6.5 pounds. Single action. The wall is 2 pounds, and the brake is about 3 3/4 pounds. If I use the Cajun Gunworks hammer, it would be 3 pounds. I've tried that, and I'm not personally a fan of how light that is, so I switched over to the Apex hammer to give me a heavier single action pull. Also gives me a more defined wall because of that heavier pull. Very nice trigger. I like it. As for how the system works internally, here I have a somewhat built out decocker sear cage with a prototype firing pin block lifter. It's not what I have in my P-01 currently, but it will do for showing how this works. If you know CC75s, you know that the firing pin block lifter is engaging with this surface on the trigger bar right here. The problem with this surface is when the slide cycles and pushes the trigger down, this surface does not have enough height to keep the firing pin block engaged. Firing pin block lifter engaged, sorry. It'll just come and then slip, and then that'll cause the firing pin block lifter to reset. We don't want that. So I've moved the engagement surface from here to right here with this long surface. And what that'll do is keep the lifter active after a slide cycle. So we could push the trigger bar back and we can see the lifter is, engaging, disengaging. But if we pull down and simulate a slide cycle, we could see that it remains engaged. Then I could pull back and it'll be disengaged yet again. As for how that looks like inside the pistol, I've taken apart the P-01 here. We have our lifter there. You can pull the trigger, hammer goes down, slide cycles. We could simulate a slide cycle here, hammer back, and we push down the trigger bar. We can see that our sear has reset, but not our lifter. And the sear catches the hammer, lifter stays engaged, and we get a short reset. You might notice that compared to an OEM lifter, this lifter is significantly shorter in height. That is to deal with clearance issues with the lifter. I'll point that out here. If you look at the slide for a P-01 or any CC75 for that matter, you'll see in this section here, this restricts how high you can have the lifter. Sorry, getting that in focus. This part, which is probably for the extractor, probably extra material for the extractor pin. This area restricts how high you can have the lifter during a slide cycle. If it's too high, what's going to happen is you're going to hit the slide over here, and you could either slow down the slide, cause a malfunction, or you might get some trigger reset action by the slide pushing the lifter down, which then pushes the trigger bar forward. You might get some of that trigger reset action, forced reset action. But if you wanted to do that, there are better surfaces for the timing of that system, namely here, but we won't go into that. For our second modified part here, we have the firing pin block. Compared to OEM, I've moved the firing pin block a lot lower down to compensate for the lower lifter. Also added 2 anti-rotation tabs to improve consistency for the firing pin block. Sometimes the firing pin block can rotate a little if you're using slightly smaller springs, because in the OEM lifter, the spring is what is the anti-rotation mechanism. If you're using a Cajun Gunworks spring, it's slightly smaller. You're going to have a little bit of rotation. This just to add some support to that to make sure we get more consistency. At the back, I'm using that as a firing pin block status indicator. And up in the front here, it's a ramp to make sure that when the slide comes back, the block lifts out smoothly instead of catching on that lifter. Yeah, and that's about it. That's the firing pin block and firing pin lifter of the active lifter system. Thank you for watching.